an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizards at War, Chapter 8, Active Defense. In this chapter, we find out that not only is the enemy scarier than I expected and can see through invisibility spells, evidently, but also time is acting in ways that we didn't predict. And that makes me extremely nervous. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Patricia for commissioning this episode. And Yama is here in the chat. Hi, Yama. I was thinking about today because, if it were just me, I would think that maybe I just have this tendency. But Yama is reading along with me and has been having similar reactions in the chat with this book and the previous book. Of just every time a certain thing that goes not according to plan, her reaction has also been, I hate it. I really don't like it. And I was thinking today about how that really is evidence that we've got a good writer on our hands. Because there are certain writers who can put in obstacles and moments of like, oh, you thought it was going this way, but it's not. And I will sort of just roll with it and be like, oh, I'm interested in seeing what happens. Oh, I didn't expect that. That's interesting and exciting. But with Diane Duane, I feel like the stakes feel so real that I am genuinely anxious when certain things happen the way that they happen in these books. And I just feel like that really points to how excellently she has gotten me into the world that she's created here. It would be so, I don't know. I just think that I had just the gut reaction that I had to the realization that it's Monday and they left home. Was it Saturday that they left? I'm trying to even remember exactly how much time has actually passed. I felt like that swoop of like nauseous anxiety in my stomach that you have when you realize like, oh, there's a test today and I forgot to study for it. That kind of feeling where I'm out of time and it's too late now kind of thing, you know? I just really think that not every book would be able to cause that reaction in me, even if this exact same plot device was deployed. And I think that's like pretty awesome and impressive, as much as I don't like it. I don't like being made to feel this way. And, saying again what I said in the intro, we have our friends here with invisibility spells protecting them. And we've got monsters that can just see through that. Excuse me? Since when? I didn't know that we could just not have spells affect us. When is that allowed? How does that work? If they aren't affected by that, if they can see through it, what other magic has no effect on them? All of this makes me extremely nervous. So, starting off chapter 8, Kit wakes up and Paunch is right there. And I really like the way that this is written. He gets woken up by Paunch scratching and the collar jingling and stuff. And he wakes up and he's like, why is this weird? Because I wake up to this sound every day almost. Why does this feel weird? And then he realizes that the profound silence that is the backdrop of this sound is the thing that's like kind of gnawing at him. And that is really feels like an extremely believable moment where, and this happens a lot, like if you lose power, you know, I think that this is something that we all notice is how incredibly quiet the house will suddenly be because there's no hum of the refrigerator. There's no, you know, vague whirring coming from your computer that's like, maybe it's asleep, but it's still on. There's no vague noise coming from your light bulbs. I have a light bulb in the bathroom that's like positively loud. And when that stuff all goes away, even if you aren't like in the midst of watching TV and the TV suddenly goes out, if the power goes out, you still know because the silence that appears, you're like, wait, that's not how it's supposed to be. That's also something that I find like kind of unnerving when in Connecticut, there was this place called Sturbridge Village. It was actually Massachusetts, but I visited when I lived in Connecticut. And they have these like, you know, old homes from around 17th century. And they have this whole village sort of preserved as it was 17th, 18th century. Of course, nothing is fitted with electricity, and there is no electric light in the on the like walkways or anything. It is all done very accurate to the time. But walking around in a neighborhood, alleged neighborhood with multiple homes, and there's no power lines, there's no lights. You go into a house and there's no background hum of electricity. Everything feels oddly inert and echoing. And it really makes you sort of wonder how, like, especially when things were being built with just very basic materials, sound must have traveled like crazy. Like you wouldn't be able to have any privacy, you know, if you shared a house with people. But even if you didn't share the house, I could see being able to hear right outside the home itself. So anyway, I really like this moment of Kit just being like, oh God, this is so weird. I hate this. Like it shouldn't make me as unnerved as it does because I will go to the moon and there's no sound, but that silence just feels different there. And also I can literally see Earth from there. So it just doesn't have the same energy to it. And I also love the fact that his mother made him pack a ton of food. And she was like, yeah, maybe you can go hungry, but I don't care if your dog can talk. He isn't going to understand it if you run out of food to feed him. So you're going to take absolutely everything with you, and you're going to be able to be a good dog owner at the very least. And you know what? I respect that. I really do. I am not sure that I agree that Paunch wouldn't understand. I feel like Paunch might act like he doesn't understand because he just wants sympathy. And look, I'm not mad at that. You know, like sympathy can be very nice. But I think he probably would get it, but I am uninterested in listening to him complain. So I think this is good policy. So Paunch tells Kit also that he doesn't need his air bubble. He says, I can take the air with me if I think about it. And I was like, word, can you? And then Kit says maybe it's not just our power that's getting a boost. And I was like, oh, I don't think I thought of that. That's kind of fascinating because Paunch is already able to do some shit that like, it doesn't feel like he should be able to. And the idea of there being an additional boost there is fascinating because the way his power seems to manifest is extremely different from everyone else. So I'm just really curious about what else we're going to get to see from him because even in just this chapter, Paunch is able to do some rad shit. And even the power that is living inside of Ronan is like, wow, that's really smart at one point about what Ponch has decided to do. So I think that's kind of amazing. If you are able to impress one of the powers, I mean, damn, you know? Kit gets this manual out. And it says, riffled through to an image of the world to which Ponch had brought them. The world had no name that living beings had ever given it. Nonetheless, it had its own name in the speech, and the manual showed its location well out towards the edge of a small irregular galaxy some hundreds of thousands of light years past the local group. Kit paged through the manual to his routines for vacuum management and found the one that he'd been using on the moon and spoke the words that would activate his personal bubble. The position of the planet's little star, now high in the sky. Except for that, nothing had changed. Kit glanced to the left, and he sees this rise in this direction, and is looking over, and he starts to be like, something about this feels like it's not right. And this is sort of actually preceded by some thinking over that I don't want to ignore. Kit is wondering what Nita's deal is with Ronan, but not in the way that I was sort of expecting. I thought maybe it would be ooh, I wonder if she's into him, maybe a little bit of a feeling of jealousy. Instead, it's more she seems weirdly squirrely around him, and I don't really know what that's about. What is the deal there? And I really appreciated that it's nothing about Kit. He isn't making this about him. He's wondering about his friend and why she's feeling the way that she's feeling. That's a good friend, you know? And it just makes me I'm just so satisfied with these two being as mature as they are about romantic shit, you know? Granted, I feel at their age, it probably would be more drama than it is in these books, but also they're wizards. And so they're going to have a whole different perspective on everything. And they've been forced to mature faster in a lot of ways because they have much bigger, badder priorities to worry about. So I'm not mad at this at all. And he also talks to a boulder at one point. It's not alive, but it can still give him a sort of impression. And it says that nobody has ever lived on this planet. And it would have been nice because we had water and we had an atmosphere at one time. We could have sustained life, but nobody was here. And the boulder just seems a little bit melancholy about it. So this is, let's see. I'm trying to find the spot where he actually figures it out. Oh, right. I forgot about this. Kit says, your choice as dogs must have gone the usual way since there's no choice without wizards, and there are dog wizards, Riao tells me. Ponch's expression was eloquent of skepticism. Oh, well, if you're going to believe things cats say about dogs. Kit got a sense he was poised above a dangerous abyss. Okay. Maybe I should ask someone who knows about it firsthand. We have wizards, yeah. But as far as the choice, I just know what everybody's mom tells them when they're still drinking milk. The usual thing. There was us and the ones, and we ruled the world. And then the bad thing came and said, I can make it better for you. But we said, how? We have the ones. We live with them and hunt with them and run around with them. And they give us whatever we need and everything's fine. So the bad thing went away. The end. So come on and throw the rock. And this is something that Kit keeps thinking about. The fact that Ponch is weird when he's asked this question. He doesn't get into it. There's a tone that feels like he's skating over a lot of details. He immediately changes the subject when he gets to the end of this alleged story. All of it gives the impression of somebody who is trying to avoid thinking about something, not just avoid talking about it. He wants to distract himself from whatever this is as well, which I think is particularly interesting. I don't know. There's something about that, because there is a real difference in attitude with people when they're when they're in denial themselves versus trying to hide something from someone else. And it just has a kind of like forced unconsciousness about it. Like if you stopped them and you were like, why did you just kind of avoid the question? They would genuinely act like, avoid the question, but I answered the question. What do you mean? And to a degree, they would actually feel that way. But I think inside they would know. Yama says, Punch, no, we've been there about this easy choice thing. Let's be real here. Yeah. That was actually, Yama, that was something that occurred to me as well, was like, if that was how it allegedly went with you, and you had just had the experience on Alalu that Punch had with them, wouldn't you have discussed this? I would have thought this would come up. That said, this book begins like a day after the last book ends. So maybe they just haven't had the time to talk about it. And I would be willing to accept that as an explanation. But, you know, one would think it might be mentioned. So Kit, this is it. Kit says that, like, I've done enough throwing of the rocks. Let's have a look and see what time it is. And this is when he realizes that it is Monday. We're running really late. We need to get Neats up. And Nita, when he tells her this, like, there is the same sort of reaction I think that I had when reading it, of just that sick swoop of anxiety. Nita, though, is in the midst of a dream while all this is happening. The dream starts out with her looking in the mirror at her zit, which is very funny. I don't know why that got me so bad, but it just feels like so many dreams will start that way with something extremely ordinary. And then it will start to devolve into weird shit. And you're like, what, how did I get here? So this is when she begins to speak to, like, it's not like the spirit of, it's like the spirit of wizardry, I guess she says later. It's very, very particular about the way it wants to be described. So she hears this breathing in the dark. And it's a sort of vibe like something's asleep. And she, at first, her instinct is to not wake it because she's a little scared of it. And then she starts to realize that it's like almost, there's something almost comical about the breathing, like they're pretending they're asleep. And she starts to wonder if maybe the problem is that they're not awake and maybe she should wake them up. And she, let's see. Hey, can you hear me? Wake up. Nita looked around. There was nothing in any direction but the barren, gritty surface of the planet. That breathing, she thought, that's the Polulus. To her surprise, the idea didn't upset her. The sound of it frightened her a lot less than the way it looked. And after a few moments, the heavy breathing sound started to seem slightly comic. Nita rolled her eyes. Oh, come on! Are you going to just leave me talking to myself here? Say something! It won't answer you, said a voice from somewhere nearby. There is only one to whom it will answer, and that one's not here. I'm on errantry, and I greet you wherever you are. Everywhere, for quite a while now. And she asks whether or not it's Ronin, or the power in Ronin. You are thinking of one of the great intervenors, it said, the light's own designated defender. No, I would not be anything so exalted. And she thinks, are you a Twichild? And it says, no, I'm something old and something new. Are you by any chance blue? No, but often borrowed. And she asks, how come I can't see you? But you can, the being said. Her shadows flickered more energetically. All the shape I have is the one wizards give me. And she says, your wizardry. Not quite. I'm paradexis, the combined effect of the words of the speech and the power that lives within it. But without the ones who speak the words and decide how to use the power, there's no wizardry. It always takes at least 3. And she says, so you're the soul of the spells, of every spell. Yes, and to a certain extent, the manual. Wizards need their spells to give them some extra help now more than ever. Not many will notice that I'm conscious right now. Those who might be bothered by the concept of the living spell won't hear my voice. And she says, what about the Polulus? It won't answer, you said. That was what the senior wizards were trying to get it to do, wasn't it? Yes, but they were the wrong ones to speak to the Polulus and didn't know the word that needed to be said. So who's the right one to do the speaking, and what's the word? And then all of a sudden, she's at school. And she's like on the property outside. This was so odd, and I really don't know what to make of this. The person that she is talking to for the rest of this scene before she like abruptly gets woken up is a girl named Della Cantrell. And it turns out that Della is like a transfer student, and there are all kinds of rumors circulating about why she transferred. Some people are saying that her dad was involved in like some white collar crimes. Some people are saying shit about her personally, which I can only imagine. And Nita, who had often been in the position that Dell winds up being in, where it just, and I think that this is something many people understand at a certain age. You realize that I can get stylish clothing. I can change my hair. I can do all kinds of things to how I look that would make me seem like I fit in. And it won't do a goddamn thing because who I am is so embedded in a very permanent state in the minds of everybody around me at school that none of that will register at all. I will always be the fucking dork. And yeah, that is real. Like, I personally, this is something that I remember realizing in high school. And it was sort of an odd thing because as much as that can be really true, I think once you begin to accept it, it actually stops being as true. I got to a point where I began to realize like I was dressing more stylishly and I was like, my shape was coming in and I was looking cute. And yet I was still being like teased and bullied to a point. It wasn't too bad, but it was still happening. And I suddenly sort of realized like, you know what? None of that actually helps. Me doing this stuff doesn't help. So maybe I should just do what the fuck I want. And that was when I started dressing really wild. And ironically, once I started to do that, then I became more respected. And the bullying practically stopped entirely. And it just seemed like the desperate attempt to fit a mold almost drew more like pity and made me seem more pathetic. And once I stopped, that was when everybody was like, oh, okay, well, now you're like an actual person, so never mind. But when you are in the midst of it, and if you don't, you know, I dressed and did what I wanted because that was who I was. I decided to just go ahead and be who I was. But not everybody is like that. You know, that might not be true to who you are. So I got sort of lucky, I think, in that my personality really jived with the like, well, then fuck all y'all, you know? And if you're not interested in having that kind of give them the finger attitude, you're stuck to a point. And Nita decides that she's going to like be friends with this girl. and knows that it's like a kind of social suicide to do this, because everybody is going to associate her with this girl in a way that's like, oh, she's so desperate for anybody to be friends with her that she'll even be friends with this, like, you know, alleged criminal or daughter of a criminal. And Nita says, I really like this part. Let them think that, Nita had thought. When I'm dealing with them, I have to do right by them. But otherwise, after we all graduate in a few years, with luck, I'll never see most of these people again. And this is the kind of thing that I think is like a really healthy attitude. It's just the kind of thing that, for me, it's a hard thing to stick to, of course, when you're in the moment. But remembering how little these people will matter in the grand scheme of your life can be extremely helpful. It sounds like the kind of thing that's sort of trite, where you're like, but that doesn't help in the moment. Not true. I have used that myself when I'm having difficulties with people. And honestly, it did help. It made me feel a sort of distance from it. And that also has worked when I've like panicked about doing poorly on a test and stuff, which was actually my mother. Like, I came home from a very bad algebra test and my mom was like, in 10 years, you will not remember this test at all. And I was suddenly like, I felt like this freedom. I was like, oh shit, I bet I won't, you know? So Nita greets her and Della is like, hey, I feel like depressed. The news all sucks. Bombs and fighting, airports being evacuated because of terrorists. My brother's getting on my nerves. And she says, what do you do when you feel like killing your sister? Try to get her to go to some other planet, Nita said. Della smiled, a rather bitter smile. Have much luck with that? Not as much as I'd like, Nita said. So they hang out there for a bit, and then there's a teacher coming out of the side door of the school with a bunch of books and a briefcase, and they go to the car. And Della is watching and says, I hate lurking here, but lurking around home is worse. There's nowhere to hide. Even when I'm in my room, I know my mom and dad are waiting for me to come out so they can look at me that way they do. Like there's something I'm supposed to do to make everything turn out all right. Is this a metaphor for something? Because, like, part of what she was saying, it felt like the way Nita feels with the fact that everything is on them right now, you know, and they're being expected to produce results. And if they don't, like, you know, so there was a part of me that thought, is she supposed to be a manifestation of, like, Nita's sort of ennui, basically? I don't know. She says, what am I supposed to be doing to make it all right? What is it they want? Nita's eyes widened. She looked more closely at Della, but Della's face was unrevealing. You're supposed to know. You're the one who's been left in charge. You're supposed to have all the answers. Help me out here. Nita looked thoughtfully at Della, looked hard. The wind blew the hair across Della's face again. Annoyed, she lifted a hand to push it aside. Not a hand. A claw. What? Is this invading her dreams? Has Della been whatever winds up attacking Nita the whole time? Like the entire duration of this conversation? Or does something wind up butting into the dream at the end? That's my question, because if it's the second one, I can sort of look at Della's dialogue from a straightforward perspective of trying to decipher what she means. If it's the first, though, and this being has been pretending to be Della the whole time, all of the things Della is saying are questionable, and I don't know what to even pay attention to and what not. I have no idea what's happening here. She started violently as something she couldn't see struck her in the side of the head. She flinched and flung her right hand up, and the lightning bolt charm with a particularly aggressive blaster spell bound into it glinted on her charm bracelet. Nita opened her mouth to say the 23rd word of the spell. As she did, Della pressed herself back against the fence, and the darkness that surrounded the claw shimmering up around her, abolishing the blonde, the hair, the face. Is this supposed to be like the Polulus itself talking to her? The claw, though, like, you know, later on when she sees the bugs, is the claw the same type of claw that the bugs have? I don't know what this is, but she gets woken up. Somebody has put a hand over her mouth, and I was sort of like, what? Why? And then I realized Kit is trying to stop her from saying the 23rd word and setting the spell off. And Paunch is licking her in the ear. Because there is a moment, as she did, let's see, something came down over Nita's mouth, something else stuck itself in her ear. Okay, so that's Paunch from that moment too, right? Because there was a moment where I kind of was like, did something stick itself in her ear? And even though she gets pulled out of the dream, that actually like happened and stayed? What I was worried about here was like the lone one trying to use Nita as a source of information by like bugging her. You know what I mean? And by bug, I mean like not pestering. I mean bugging her the way you would bug a phone. And that maybe it was like doing something in her ear because that's how she hears what's going on. And it's like, yeah, let me get up in there. But I think from the start, that is meant to be Paunch licking her ear. I hope so. I don't need the lone one coming in here and just taking over parts of her body. Thank you very much. So this is when Kit tells her it's Monday morning. And Kit says normally it should still only be, but they never say what day of the week. So I think it's meant to be Saturday. But I'm not positive about this. So they both wind up having to make calls to their respective parents and explain why they have not been in contact for like 2 full days. And Nita's dad is really in a bad mood when she calls. And this is particularly alarming to me because it's treated like he just had a bad day at work. But I think that there's more to it than that. And based on the way things are supposed to accelerate pretty quickly, I believe that's purposeful. I think her dad is dealing with some of the like regular people fallout of what the fuck has been going on. I don't like her dad having any like this affecting him in any way. I have really enjoyed that everything that's super dangerous and worrisome has been restricted to our group of wizards who we know have supernatural means of self-defense and methods of action. But we've just got a fucking normie on the sides, and he is probably bearing some brunt of the effect, and I really hate that for him. So yeah, this whole, like, this conversation, it starts off with him, like, starting to bite her head off until she explains, like, I didn't even know what day it was. I'm really sorry. Like, this is not my choice. I wasn't just abandoning you. And when she asks, did you have a bad time in the shop today? Why? Just as it had sounded like he was calming down a little, her dad sounded angry all over again. You just sound really on edge. Not that I wouldn't have reason to be. Yes, you'd be right to say I've been feeling the strain a little more than I usually would. And he winds up apologizing for like biting her head off. And she explains to him, I'm going to do my best to stay in contact with you as often as I can, but I will have no idea how much time is going by at times. And I may tell you a certain amount of time will go by and I'll be wrong. Or I may wind up in places where calling you won't be safe. So to a point, you're just going to have to deal with the fact that I'm not going to be consistent the way you want me to be consistent. And that's just part of the deal right now. And he's like, well, I guess that's what I have to do. And ends it with, go kickle what's-its-face around the block for me. And that kind of makes her feel better because it's returned to his usual tone. So this is when she talks to the Paradexis again. You stopped me the second time, didn't you? Yes, you were in transit between states of consciousness and possibly unready to decide whether to destroy another wizard. And she's like, I really hope that you don't step in like that too often. And it says, oh, I couldn't, even if I like wanted to do that. It was just you being between consciousnesses that made it possible for me to do that at all. So let's see, where is it? Oh yeah, I forgot about how Scaret's walking around just picking up rocks and eating them because that's his breakfast. How great would it be to be Scaret, where you could just pretty much eat literally any kind of matter? That feels like a massive advantage. You don't need anything specific. You know, your nutrients are apparently so flexible. You can get I mean, there is one point where he describes I think like the teen magazines he's eating as sort of junk food. So it's not that things don't have any nutritional value at all, but it seems like it's just a much wider net when he casts it than it would be for the average being. So Nita goes to talk to Ronan, and there's this pretty interesting conversation here. Ronan, the being inside Ronan, expects her, when she expresses some concern, to purely be worried about Ronan's state of mind. And so the being sort of responds in a defensive way and says something like, his situation is hardly unique. Like, just trying to make it like this happens all the time. And Nita is like, yeah, but this must be hard for you. You're trapped inside a person. That doesn't feel like the most advantageous way for you to function. And clearly this being is taken completely off guard by the fact that she has even considered this point of view. And then it basically says, yeah, it does diminish my power a little bit and makes me less effective. However, the whole game is played in physicality. And therefore, I like doing this is the way that you win. And compares it to playing chess in that you could flip the board over and just end the game, but you're not actually winning. You're just deciding to destroy it and make the game not happen. In order to win, you have to actually play. And so being in a being, you know what I mean. While it can be like apparently a disadvantage, this is the way it has to be, which I thought that was a really good explanation, you know? Not having access to our full power, yes, it's frustrating. And if we break out before we're scheduled to, we pay the price. But for the time being, I'm okay. And I thank you very much for asking. It sounded bemused. I just really enjoyed this moment because I have expressed my concern over what it is like for Ronan, but I never thought about the being, mostly because I figure it's optional. for some reason. And like, apparently it kind of is. He can break out before he's scheduled to, as he says. But I just keep imagining that the powers have a lot more, not like omniscient knowledge and freedom than they do. I keep imagining the powers as the sort of like Judeo-Christian God concept. Somebody who can see everything at all times and knows all. And that is clearly not what they're meant to be, but it is such an ingrained concept in my mind that it is really hard for me to break out of thinking of like the being, the powers that be and their agents, I guess, in any other way. So this is when they begin their traveling with Paunch, and Paunch says, I know where we're going. Come on, let's go. And they all hold hands this time because they are feeling a little bit more nervous about everything than they were. And then they come out in the woods that he built with all of the squirrels. And I trusted personally, like immediately I was like, okay, there's a reason we're here. I had no doubt that this was still Paunch doing his job. I just didn't know what that was. You know, I didn't get it yet. But Kit doesn't have the same kind of faith in Paunch like that I want him to have. He gets real irritated and he says a couple times like, I'm really sorry about this to everybody else. Like he's apologizing on behalf of Paunch. And you know, this is absolutely not where we were headed. And he sort of yells at Paunch a little bit later, like, what the hell, man? I think we've had about enough of the joke stuff for the time being. I thought we agreed earlier that we'd come here afterward. So this is when Paunch is like, well, I needed something here. And they look up and there is this white squirrel. And it just comes down and like stands in front of them and sort of looks at them in this like, I'm waiting kind of way. And the defender says, it's an embodiment, a way to perceive the trail as an active entity rather than as something passive. Very sophisticated. I am loving this. Like, what a great idea. Go Paunch. This is so, and you know, once we begin traveling and we see how many worlds they have to go through, it makes a lot of sense that Paunch would handle it this way. I can't imagine how much they would be slowed down by him having to figure it out every time they get to a new spot and have to leave, because what it feels like is like they're flipping through the pages of a book sort of, but those pages are worlds, planets, whatever. Ahead of them in the dark, like a white streak through the blackness, the squirrel ran. Paunch tore after it. Kit ran after him, or was dragged. All the rest of them were dragged along as well, and a breath later the darkness vanished to leave them running over something that cracked and glowed. Nita looked down and gasped as the heat struck up at her, burning through her sneakers. They were running over lava under a dull red sky in which hung a single huge planet banded in eye-vibrating greens and blues. A second later, the darkness fell again, and the heat and light were gone, and they were racing through the dark, faster now. The darkness fell away behind them like the sides of a tunnel until they were out in new light. Cooler, a blue-green sky stretched over a dusty violet wasteland. And this continues, all of these different places. Paunch ran, his speed increasing so that it became more and more difficult to grasp the details of one universe before they were into the darkness again and out into the next world. The squirrel hardly had that shape anymore. It was a blurred line of light streaking ahead of them, zigzagging, jumping upward, bouncing down, world to darkness to world again, energy getting ready to discharge as soon as it reached its goal. And Nita, for her part, is like, oh my God, my legs. Like, because she's in a full-out sprint, basically, for this whole thing. Then suddenly she tripped over Scarrett, who'd stopped, and fell on top of him, and from behind Nita, Ronan fell on top of her. So we get this line from Scarrett that I thought was so funny. I don't think that this is probably like an original line, but she is on top of him. Underneath her, something hard and edgy moved, or tried to. Nita, a muffled voice said in the speech, "Could you please get off me before we accidentally become more than just good friends?" I fucking cackled at that. That was a good line. Thank you, Scarrett. I needed a little bit of humor injected into this. It's been a bit grim. So, they stand up and look around, and they see all of these weird trees. The trees were many-trunked, their branches reaching down half the time to root themselves in the ground again. Other branches and trunks reached higher, but almost immediately got involved and snarled up with the wrestling, shoving trunks and branches of other nearby trees, so that the upper canopy was as much wood as leafage. It made Nita think of a many-arched roof trying to grow into a cathedral, but strangling itself in grappling loops and buttresses and having to break away each time in some new direction. Little light pierced such a canopy, but what did was blinding. And where the light pierces, the ground is like liquefying in the heat, which, I don't care for that. I'm just saying that for me was like the kind of, there is such a risk to just walking around and being in a shaft of light too long. You know, I just felt like very nervous about that. The spongy peat black stuff underfoot bubbled where the light bored into it as if something there boiled. And eventually, like, Kit says that it smells like motor oil, and they do begin to feel like, oh, okay, yeah, that it is sort of like crude oil of some kind coming up out of the ground. And then in the distance, Nita saw the shadowy shapes moving slowly among the giant broken-backed trees, in several lines, one after the other, somber, dark, steadily approaching. Slowly, she started hearing more than just the rushing noise as the shapes got closer. She heard a low humming or singing sound, and other noises that made her hair stand on end. Anguished cries and sobbings that got louder as the marching shapes drew nearer. The crunch and creak of breaking wood told Nita that they were breaking the trees as they came, tearing down branches, ripping away every scrap of brush and undergrowth. The shrieks echoing along the path of the approaching creatures became louder every moment, and Nita had to force herself to stand still and keep silent, concentrating on not panicking as she heard the trees wailing in anguish as their branches were bitten away. Yikes. This is so elegant, the way this is done. The creatures went out of sight, bearing with them branches like banners, oozing strange sap, and behind them the trees moaned low, and more sap fell and trickled onto the soft ground, pooling like tears. Philip stirred in silent horror. So, when I say this is elegantly done, what I mean is, you want your audience to understand that these are destructive, violent beings who do not care about the suffering of other beings. But how do you do that in a way that isn't incredibly like macabre or gory to a point that it's not really appropriate for a children's book, and yet still has a huge impact on your reader? And choosing trees is just brilliant because we know Philip this whole time. This last book, we got to know him so well. he has become much more of a person to us, even though he's a tree. And we have the sound of the sobbing of these trees that they can hear as if they were people. So we don't have to watch actual, like, you know, beings that bleed and have central nervous systems get ripped apart in a gruesome kind of way. But it still has the exact same sort of effect on us as readers. Because even though these trees, Philip says later, like, they're not like me and my people. They're not fully conscious the way we are. They still clearly feel pain and fear. And later on, Nita attempts to communicate with a tree. And it is in such a state of absolute fucking terror that it won't even respond to her at all. And it was holding itself still in utter dread, frightened to speak to Nita, frightened to do anything at all. It was afraid of something far worse than the mere physical destruction Nita had seen. Well, what? What's worse? What else is happening here? What? And the fact that it's like afraid to talk to her, it's really easy to sort of be like, it would have been fine, tree. You could talk to her. You could trust her. But the thing is, we have then this being later seen right through Nita's invisibility spell. So I'm not sure that's true. I don't think I can trust my own judgment because we're dealing with beings I don't know about. For all I know, if this tree had talked to her, that would have been a big fucking problem. You know, I don't know. They made their way closer to the long lines of dark creatures weaving their way among the tree trunks. Nita could just barely hear the soft footsteps of the others around her and the slight rustling noise that Scarrett and Philip made when they moved. One of the shapes came around the trees and drifted toward her almost without a sound. And this is when she has her spell up. This creature walks past her. Nita began to back away slowly and softly as the parade continued. At last, the final dark-shelled creature went past Nita and out of sight beyond the trees. There's something really bad going on here. Without warning, from behind her, she heard a different kind of humming sound, getting louder by the second. She had just enough time to jump back as a claw huger than any of the ones on the parading creatures came snapping straight at her face. She jumped back again in shock, grabbing for her charm bracelet, and the creature followed, snapping at her again. It sees me. But how? The huge shelled creature lunged at Nita, its claws snapping as she dodged around the tree, doing her best to stay out of its way while she dumped the invisibility spell, which could interfere with what she was about to do. Then she said the short phrase of a basic defense spell. So this spell that she is about to use here is meant to destroy whatever is attacking her. And even though this thing is attacking her, and it's obviously malicious, she uses it and immediately feels a kind of guilt about it. I hate having to use so final a spell on anything, but... And then she gasped and backed up fast as the creature came right at her through the fading light of the wizardry. I should mention, I say that this is intended to destroy whatever's attacking her. Apparently, that's not the original intent of the spell. It's her power boost that makes it a little bit more high-powered than she had expected it to be when she launched it. But it still doesn't work. So what good is that? Its armor was shattered and cracked, but it was still making that awful bone-rattling hum that now escalated into a roar. This is the kind of thing that I think could be very, very unnerving if you saw it on screen. Sound is underrated, in my opinion. as a way to get under people's skin. And this sounds extremely alien. You know, there's something about this constant humming that it just freaks me out. It feels like there's some sort of significance to it that I don't understand. It just makes me very nervous. And that as the backdrop of this whole attack, plus the fact that it can see through her spell, it all combined, it just was very upsetting, genuinely upsetting. Nita blasted the creature again. From behind her, Kit, also visible again, came up and did the same. His blasting spell was built differently from Nita's, and this one knocked the thing back against the nearest tree, but only for a second. The creature recovered its footing and came at them again. I can't get over this. Like, what kills this thing? This is a couple overpowered for the moment wizards attacking at the same time, and it's still not taking this fucking thing out. So the being in Ronan basically forces them down. The spear of light streaked over her and Kit and into the huge chitin-mailed form. The ferocity of the light left her briefly blind. She could only hear, and what she heard was a roar like the wind shouting in rage, followed by a silent wave of white-hot force that made Nita throw her arms up around her head to shield it. Then, nothing but silence. Amen. What a relief. Thank God they had this thing with them. Like, what would they have done otherwise? And when she kind of sits back up again, what I think is sort of the soot of this being getting completely evaporated is the wrong, disassembled, I guess, has settled on her and Kit. I think we need to get out of here right away now, Ronan said, and go somewhere quiet for a think. Hurriedly, the six of them vanished, and that's the end of the chapter. I wanted so bad to keep reading. This is extremely scary. I just love how frightened I was. This it got me, man. It really did. And also, mentioning about how great having the setup of meeting Philip, the last book, so that the trees, it feels more high impact. I feel a similar way about having introduced Scarret, because it is such a thing in our culture. And by our culture, I mean human culture, really. We associate insects with rot and decay a lot of the time. And so they tend to be representative of dark forces, of evil, of, a sort of, what's the word I want? I guess decay is really the best word. Things slowly unraveling and coming apart, not necessarily because they were made to by anybody, but because they're being neglected or abandoned. And I really appreciate that we have met Scarret first. And so we have this idea that there are bug-like aliens out there that are good people and on our side and can be wizards. And we get that first before we get these bad guy bugs. Because I just think that it gives us somebody to cling to a little bit and doesn't make the enemy feel quite as cliche as it could otherwise feel. 'Cause insect-like aliens, that's, I feel, one of the more common depictions of aliens. We combine often the aspects of insects that we find the most unattractive, that make them seem the most alien, and we combine them with the aspects of being either a mammal or reptile that we also find gross. So we'll take the disjointed legs and the chitinous shell, but then we also want to add like goo and slime and you know what I mean, to sort of like bring it to the next level of gross repulsiveness. And I just think it's really interesting that before we meet these guys, we have Scarret and get to know him pretty well. Not super well, but pretty well. And thus, she manages to sort of sidestep the feeling of this being a trope that is sort of tired, you know. But anyway, I had better wrap up, but I really, really enjoyed that chapter. Yeah, I don't know. I feel the threat a lot. And I can't wait to see what happens. I'm a little sad because I expect that the next chapter is going to be all Darine. And while I am into Darine's storyline, I'm much more curious about this right now. And I would like to stay here a little bit longer. But, you know, I maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe it'll be half Darine, half them next chapter. I hope so. But anyway, all right. I will be seeing you guys again soon. Thank you again to Patricia for commissioning this. Thank you, Yama, for hanging out in the chat. And I'll be seeing you all again soon. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.